Hi, I'm Lola Akindoyin and I'm the head of programme at the Hackney Place Partnership. And I'm really pleased to welcome Josh to Hackney from Active Oxfordshire. I won't say too much by way of introduction, but it's just really good to have the opportunity to have a conversation about all things relating to comparative configurational analysis, CCA, the conditions for change, and yeah, we hope that everyone gets something from it.
So one of the things we were talking about previously is around data collection, and obviously everything that we gather in Oxfordshire, in Hackney, and wherever else around the country kind of is able to be aggregated, and the CCA approach allows it to make meaningful comparison and so on. But on the ground, that data collection can be pretty tricky. That's certainly our interpretation of it. I was been interested in how you found that process of collecting data in a meaningful and I guess wholesome way that the community are willing to participate in.
Yeah, gosh, I wish I had a smooth and easy answer for that one. Um, and in some respects, I mean, I definitely feel that it's something that we're still continuing to work on because having it, I think there are a number of things that I'd probably flag. One is what data are we collecting and why? And with this sort of CCA approach, I think it does give a bit of it's a bit of a leveler in terms of like the different types of things we can feed into evidence in the conditions for change. So again, I feel like that's one of the really positive benefits of it. But also, what does that mean? Like, what is the evidence? What is the data? And actually, I think we probably needed to spend more time defining some of that so that we could help our partners to understand what that means. I think naturally the nature of a lot of these conditions for change is that we are looking for narrative or kind of like visual representations of how change is occurring. So like I know like some people have done like social network analysis and they've done things like that so you can see like more partners coming into a space, or like we've done some stakeholder mapping that's shown how like the lines of engagement have got thicker as we've worked much more closely with some of those organisations. So I think there's that, but then also, you know, the issues around like making this meaningful at a community level. And, you know, we've talked about like a big part of our work, both programmes or both areas, is like that community-led change and that kind of like community-led capacity. And, you know, we've had like real challenges with bringing data because you can only analyze data if you receive data.
Yeah.
The organisations can only give us data if they receive the data, and actually people can be quite hesitant about giving some of their data, even though it may be to us just to help us understand our physical activity programming. So as much as we've tried, we've found that we've had quite incomplete data sets that therefore make comparisons sometimes quite difficult, or it's difficult to actually understand them. So we've had feedback from our partners about the importance of stories and storytelling and narrative to accompany any data that we do have. But we also do recognise and understand why some of that kind of, you know, sort of almost hardened quant data is necessary. So we are planning as a next phase of work to actually almost try and problem solve that together. So rather than like thinking, oh, we've got to try and find this perfect formula, or even with our like external evaluator, actually we want to do that by working with our community anchor organisations because they're the ones that are responsible for, you know, the data collection, but they also understand the kind of trauma, they understand the challenges, the inequalities that exist. So we need to take all of that into consideration in how we design like that next level. But I don't know what you're thinking is around like your plans in Oxfordshire.
Yeah, it's a tricky one to balance because we do collect in some of our work quantitative data, but we run into real life issues and reservations that people have about giving that, and in many cases that might be because they perceive that it is linked to some form of institutional racism and linked to profiling, and why do you want this data, and almost ultimately comes back to an issue of trust and what's being done with that, and do the community see any benefit from that transaction almost of giving you that data. So we're anticipating that a lot of our work, which is already the case, but we're going to certainly through the Place Universal Offer work, will be around a storytelling methodology which centres on the one significant change, where we'll take verbatim, word-for-word transcriptions of people's perceptions of the work, and we hope to follow a cohort of people who are involved in different places in the system through the whole 3 years, and through that then make some interpretations. But I was interested in what you were saying about interpreting that information together.
Yeah.
It's not for one person in a dark room or Active Oxfordshire to then make sense of that and translate it. Actually, that's quite a beneficial exercise in itself, to sit down and sense make of everything that's been gathered and decide collectively what the themes are. Because there's a risk otherwise you collect all that data or all that information and then you almost appear to secretly go off and turn it into something and translate it. And actually that could be quite a collegiate exercise to do together. So I think that's something that I'm certainly going to take away, that when we start gathering that, when we come to the sense making and the interpretation, that we do that as a collective as best we can.
Yeah, yeah. And it's super interesting, because one of the things that we've learned about evaluation and learning, and I remember this is something that somebody in our team who had responsibility around this work had talked about, is the fact that actually doing this work is also relational. And I think that there's sometimes with sort of either data collection or things that are focused on how we interpret, impact or understand like kind of learning, it needs to have some distance to it. And, you know, actually, I think we found that by taking a more relational approach and embedding that as part of our kind of evaluation and learning approach, it meant that organisations were more open, partners were more open in how they talked about stuff. Their stories were really rich in terms of, and that almost collegiate approach of actually, this is my story, but actually I see like similarities in a organisation across, like in that part of the borough, or I see similarities in that organisation. And so by reflecting back, I think it pulled out more, but actually it then also helped them and us to sense make together. So we were able to pull out key themes and then again feed it back, and it just felt like a much more collaborative process, and one that certainly from the feedback we had was appreciated. So I know we're definitely planning to build on doing more of that, and doing more of that with more of a cross-section of stakeholders as well, which I think is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, and it sort of ties into one of the things we're trying to look at as well, is something that around the collaboration, we think by gathering the stories and hearing other people's stories, that a sense of empathy and understanding and trust should develop, because sometimes you make different parts of the system or make assumptions about other parts of the system and why a decision is ending up on the ground in the way it does. And I think by taking a more storytelling approach to it and almost understanding how these decisions get made and where the power sits and how it could move more towards the community, we think that might start to sort of build some of those bridges that ultimately will then lead to better collaboration and work. That's certainly one of our working theories at the beginning. If we can build trust between organisations, then more democratic or decisions get made and ultimately more impact gets made. And we're trying to work through that at the moment, right at the beginning of it, admittedly.
And do you have any thoughts at the moment about how you might share that back?
No, that's one thing we need to look at how we do that, because I think how we want to be able to share that with the whole system or anyone who has an interest in it in any way. They don't need to even have been directly involved in it, but we need to look at what mechanisms we have already or whether one needs creating. So we have a movement called Oxfordshire on the Move, which is where partners come together every 6 months and it's kind of crowdsourced content and information. And we think that could give us a potentially a positive mechanism for reflecting back and learning. It's certainly been a vehicle for that to date. So we think that might give us one way of doing it, but there's certainly been some quite creative way that's been done in Oxfordshire over the years. But again, that's been led by the community. So there's been stories collected that have then been done as spoken word pieces on stage. There's been art gallery exhibitions based on people's stories, and there's different ways that's been reflected back that feels that it's then been absorbed more and understood more. But I guess we need to sort of work with the community or work with the people involved in it. How do you want to tell this story? How do you want it to be shared? But it's certainly something we need to do if we're going to have the cycle of learning and action and that going.
Yeah, sounds excellent.
When you one thing I was curious about is how you, once you have got results or data or what some findings and some joint interpretation, how do you how do you share that with it, sort of with the close group of partners and then the bigger group of partners? How have you done that so far?
Sure. So we've done it through, I guess, a couple of ways. And what I would almost add in answering the question, what I'd also add is like the sharing isn't enough. So how do we share it and then sort of follow through with the action? And that's definitely something that we are focusing out almost like next sort of phase of work on, is that we've built a lot of learning and there's a deep understanding, but now we really need others to like pick up the things that and progress the changes that are needed.
Okay.
So the point about almost kind of like taking it from understanding conditions to actually leading the conditions or leading the change is really necessary. So I think certainly with our community partners, that kind of ongoing relationship, bringing them together, using our network meetings to reflect that back, bringing others into the space, you know, so whether it be kind of like colleagues from health or like our lead members, so that they're together and reflecting on things. But then there are other areas and other kind of like key teams with and organisations with our local system that we're still needing to engage a bit more. So the thing I do feel that we need to focus on within this next phase is also being really clear about kind of like the metrics that we're going to use to understand impact. So if we have evidence, it comes through, we've learned together, and now we want it to influence and change something, how will we understand that? But that we're not overlaying that, but that's also coming from the very groups and the people that we're working with, so that there's kind of more collective ownership and accountability for actually how we're putting out that evidence, but also the agreed methodology for understanding that impact and change.